Welcome to Clavid. This video in the how-to series shows how to add a SuisseID to an existing Clavid account. If you do not have a Clavid OpenID account yet, please watch the separate video called Create a Clavid OpenID account using a SuisseID. I am first going to the Clavid website by entering clavid.com in my browser. There I use the Secure Login tab at the top right of the web page to enter the Clavid portal where I manage my identity. I log into the Clavid portal using my authentication method. Now I have to assure that my SuisseID is properly installed on the system I'm using, and I have to plug in my SuisseID before I continue. So I plug in my SuisseID into the USB port of my computer. Your SuisseID might look differently to mine depending on the vendor where you bought the SuisseID. Okay, back to the Clavid portal. As the SuisseID is actually a SSL client certificate, I press the SSL client certificate menu item where I manage the personal certificates. Then I press the Add button in order to attach my SuisseID with my Clavid account. In the pop-up menu, I choose my certificate and enter my PIN in order to allow the computer access to my SuisseID. After entering my PIN, I arrive at the Add Certificate dialog. The SuisseID logo at the top of the page shows me that my SuisseID got successfully recognized. Now I enter a name for my certificate, which is important in case I manage more than one certificate in the future. I just use the name SuisseID and press Add. I now see my SuisseID in my list of SSL client certificates, and I could already use it for authentication. However, I want to improve the protection of my Clavid account and go to the menu item Account Settings and the submenu item Login Settings. Here I change my preferred authentication method to SSL client certificate, and I might disable username, password, login in order to improve my account protection. I press Change Settings and I have finished the SuisseID configuration of my Clavid account. Now I just want to try my SuisseID on an OpenID enabled service, so I log out from the Clavid portal by clicking on the logout link in the top menu. Then I enter the URL plaxo.com, which is an OpenID enabled major online address book service. I just click the Sign In at the top menu and then click on the link Sign In with OpenID. Here I enter my OpenID called master.clavid.com and press Sign In. I get now redirected to the Clavid login screen. I see that Clavid automatically recognized that I am using a SSL client certificate, which is actually my SuisseID. I assure that my SuisseID is plugged in. As I have just used my SuisseID in adding it to my Clavid account, I will not get prompted for entering my PIN again. So I simply click Login. As Plaxo asks for additional information such as nickname, email address, etc., I get asked if I agree to forward that information from Clavid to Plaxo. I press Approve once and end up at Plaxo authenticated with my SuisseID. You want to know more? Go to the Clavid website at clavid.com. Thank you. Clavid. One key, all access.